Welcome so much to this talk about what's arguably been the biggest story of the year, possibly even the decade, the COVID-19 pandemic, which is affecting everyone and the way we live, and it's also affected journalism very much, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Some of the challenges that we've seen as media have to face, and how it will change journalism for maybe forever. We're joined by great, interesting people here. I'll let them introduce themselves in a bit. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is KASPERKAASGAARD. I'm a journalist. I work at an online political newspaper in Denmark called Altinget, sort of comparable to Politico, if you know that. We have niches for a lot of policy areas. I have also been a fellow here at Constructive Institute, where I'm sitting today in Aarhus. I did that last year, and there I focused on health journalism, and that of course was very much affected by the pandemic that sort of rolled in when I was halfway through my fellowship. I did a project on that. I'll get back to that in a few seconds, but first I think you should meet the rest of the panel here today. I'll have them introduce themselves because I think that's nice for you to hear from them. First up is RITY KABUR, co-founder of the Quint, and with us from India. So please, RITY.
Hi, I'm Ritu. I'm the co-founder, like Casper said, of the Quint, which is a mainstream, mobile-first, digital-only general news product. We have a Hindi news, product called Hindi Quint. We also have a health website called Fit. I come with about 23 years of a background in broadcast, and 5 years back, we stepped out of broadcast and moved to digital. And so that's me.
That's good. And I thought also I'd have all of you just say a few words on how the pandemic has affected your professional life, maybe your organization. So I should have asked you to do that, Ritu.
The pandemic has actually made us proved to be a bit of a catalyst in some of the plans we've been having for a long time, which was to be a little more dynamic and be a little more diverse. Otherwise, we were sort of concentrated in a metro city of New Delhi. We were in offices in the suburb of New Delhi, and we've been planning to for a while to go low on cost and move away from commodity news and move much more towards enterprise, investigative, special projects largely. And that had been in the thinking as the offering that we wanted to be as a product. But with the pandemic, with all of us moving to work from home, with a serious focus on cost saving as revenues dipped, at least initially, we've actually been able to move towards the product we really wanted to be. So in a sort of strange, twisted way, it pushed us into a plan that we'd had for a while to move away from all things news to enterprise and exclusive journalism.
Yeah. Thank you. Next up, we have LAGERCRANTZ joining us from Sweden, from the Swedish public broadcaster. If she can hear me, her picture.
Yes, yes, I'm Ann LAGERCRANTZ. I'm the director of news and sports at the Swedish public service broadcaster, and we organize around 900 people in 40 spots, 40 locations in Sweden. And what I've learned, and I agree with Rita, that this has weirdly given a lot of opportunities as well. So I learned how fast we can move as a legacy company, and how we can build trust with a change in the tone of voice.
Great, thank you. We'll dive much more into those things later on. Then I want to say hi to Kaori Koyama from Japan, co-founder and editor-in-chief of The Leads, a new startup. Thank you. What have you learned, and who are you?
Hi, my name is Kaori, and thank you for the introduction. I'm the co-founder of The Leads Asia, which is like a non-governmental organization / platform for young people in East Asia together, and to discuss and think together, establish just in April this year, actually, in accordance with the pandemic and this prevailing skepticism over the meaning of globalization. So the effect of COVID. So back in March, with the outbreak of COVID-19 in almost all the Asian countries, we were very much acknowledging this one serious problem in our media structures in the region due to political, sociocultural, and diplomatic reasons. I think East Asian countries have such a few channels through which we can get to know each other, especially in the conventional mass media. So due to this fact that the grassroots level voice of citizens is almost unavailable is in domestic news media, unless you're a multilingual genius to understand the local news in each country, you need to attain information about neighboring countries from America, for example, which is written in English. So this was really prominent during the Corona times. And because of this, some colleagues based in all over Asia and I decided to establish a platform where we can gather freely and directly talk about issues and find solutions to today's issues together. So that's
and this need for a common sphere, a space to share knowledge and experiences. That's really a key aspect of this pandemic response that we've seen in the media. So we'll talk much more about that later. We need to finally give the word to Gabriella Stern, Director of Communications at the World Health Organizations.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm Gabby Stern, Director of Communications at WHO. I was a journalist until 5 years ago. The most recent role I had was Deputy Managing Editor at the Wall Street Journal. I was at the Wall Street Journal for about 25 years and then at another newspaper before that. So I come from an abiding love of journalism. That's who I am fundamentally. But I moved into nonprofit communications 5 years ago, and I've been at the World Health Organization in Geneva for 5 years. I mean, sorry, for 1.5 years. And obviously, the COVID pandemic has been all-consuming for the World Health Organization. And for my department, as our friends here have said, COVID-19 was a forcing mechanism in many ways to make us more modern, more multimedia, faster, less risk-averse, more experimental, because we have had to reach hundreds of millions, if not billions of people in many languages and many formats with health information, how they should protect themselves. So we had to transform ourselves in real time. So as terrible as the pandemic has been, it's actually been very beneficial to the Department of Communications at WHO. And I think that's true of many crises. They bring out the worst in people and they bring out the best in people.
Yeah, and we're so lucky to have you here, Gabby. Thank you for this. And this transformation in real time is something I think we've all gone through, and it's good to have you with your background in journalism and then you placed in the center of the epicenter of the communications of this pandemic. So that's great. Just to remind our viewers what the situation is now, I thought we'd just let you, Ritu, from India, just give us a brief status on, you can contain 1/6 of the global population in your country. What's the health situation like in India at the moment, here as we approach the end of 2020?
Well, let me look at the glass half full first. It's looking like we might have a vaccine which may have 60 to 70% efficacy, but will be manufactured, is being manufactured in the country, and therefore we will be able to reach large chunks of our massive population, hoping as early as January, perhaps. You know, the one that we're working on, Covishield is what we're calling it. It's the AstraZeneca. So that's the bright spot. Otherwise, the country is dealing with a surge. There was a lockdown, which wasn't very effective. The lockdown, in fact, was very, very detrimental to labor that works in the informal sector. There was suddenly factories were shut down. They were thrown into camps, into quarantine camps, which were very, 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 very poorly equipped. They lost their jobs. They were the people who walked up to 2,000 kilometers. I don't know how much that is in miles, back to their villages. Some of them have tried to come back because there isn't too much happening in the villages. But of course, in the process, the virus spread. In the movement of the migrant labor, the virus spread further into the interiors of the country, which had so far been protected. It is on a surge right now. Interestingly, as we drove out of New Delhi, just a few kilometers outside of Delhi, and we were driving through the countryside in northern India, we found that it looked like there was no pandemic at all. No one's wearing masks. There's no social distancing. It's life as usual. And you know how it is. We're such a large country, and we live in, a lot of our cities, we live in small, we live cheek by jowl, 8 people to a 10 by 10 feet room. And yet we have examples of a slum in Mumbai called Dharavi, where they were able to contain it. So how much of it is herd immunity? How much of it is an inherent resistance to the virus? Because our fatality rate has been in the 1.5 to 2%, which is much lower. So are we on a surge right now? Yes. Is the healthcare system not prepared for it? And is the healthcare system overwhelmed? Are we running short of ventilators and oxygen? Yes, we are. Are we running short of ICU beds? Yes, we are. But like I said, if the vaccine is available as early as Jan, that should be good. That should be good.
Yeah, and this, I think, is just a great example of just one country, all these contradictory stories coming up, and this is a global story. It affects all of us, and we're all having to deal with it, and it evolves constantly. And if we're going to have this global conversation, then it's really difficult because we're all in different situations, going up and down these curves. And Gabby, that's why I thought I'd give the word to you now when we move towards the journalism's role in it, because you really sit at the center and look at all parts of the world. And from there, I thought maybe you could tell us, in your view, journalism as this filter between the reality that you see and then the reality that the public experiences. What have been some of the challenges, maybe some of the shortcomings that the media have faced in this tumultuous time?
So, obviously there is no media, right? There are many, many, many news outlets around the world, all of them with different capacities, different areas of focus, etc. So it's not a monolith. And we obviously deal with a wide range of reporters every day, 24/7, 365. Because this is a new pathogen, COVID-19 is new. Reporters have had to learn about it in real time along with scientists around the world. In my view, the best journalism has been done by reporters who are using their natural curiosity, their rigorous fact-checking, and their concern for their mission, which is journalism should help people fundamentally, right? It enlightens. It, as we used to say at the Journal, afflict the powerful and raise the poor. I forget what the cliche is, but the journalists who have taken that lens to COVID have done brilliant coverage, and there are many of them. The ones who have treated COVID like a horse race, who have kind of made it, who have sort of who's up, who's down, who's right, who's wrong, that has trivialized a deadly serious issue. And that's been disappointing, and I've seen it in a lot of different places, and not necessarily even about or involving WHO. I'm a news junkie, so I read a lot, mostly in English, a little bit in French. So I guess what I'm saying is news organizations, they don't have to all focus on getting health information to people and That's our job. That's the job of CDCs and ministries of health and nonprofits. And it can be the job of news outlets. But what I do think is, in a life and death situation, whether you're covering a pandemic or a war or something really dire where lives are at stake and livelihoods are at stake, I do think it's important for reporters and columnists and editors to think to themselves, to sort of reflect on what is our mission? Do we do things the way we've always done them when things are good and easy? Or do we add an overlay? Do we think about our role in society in a different, more serious way? And I think I would like to have seen more news outlets do that. And I'd like to see them do that going forward. Just to Ritu's point, everyone is very excited about the vaccine candidates. But right now we see what Dr. Tedros described as a stampede by the wealthy countries to snap up all the supply. So the people that Ritu described, who might be in rural Bihar or might be in a slum in Mumbai or wherever, and you can say the same thing about favelas in Rio and so on, are they going to get the vaccine in real time, the way people in London, Liverpool, Los Angeles, Copenhagen will? And at WHO, we and our partners have made the economic as well as the moral case for the vaccines to be distributed equitably and wisely to all high-risk people in all countries initially and go from there. And we're very concerned that the vaccine will go to all people in rich countries, regardless of whether they're high risk.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be a huge story. But here we're also looking at the stories that we have covered, and I want to maybe take the point you made before about the role of the media having to redefine themselves, maybe, and getting the information to the public. I want to take that to you, Anna, a public broadcaster in Sweden. If you go back to February, March, April, what were some of the dilemmas and problems around this debate? I'm sure you had in your house, and how did you find it difficult? We'll get into the solutions that we all found to this later on, but just set the stage for us, please.
It's a dilemma, of course, because journalism and creativity is not always a perfect match with social distance. So we need to reinvent how to meet, how to work on the field, how to be as safe as possible. And of course, reporters have families and they're worried and sometimes afraid, and people die. So that's one aspect, to also be a considerate employer. Another aspect is, as Gabby mentioned, is that it's so much information from so many authorities, and it is a fear to become sort of the master's voice, because we air so much of what the government and authorities say. But to really invest time in fact-checking, in investigations, in questioning, so to balance the output. And I think one big learning for us is really to try to put things in perspective. And the rise of data journalism, and I've seen that from newsroom all over the world, has been extremely helpful. It might not only always be constructive, because the numbers may be grim, but to really see, okay, how many are in intensive care, and what are the changes? And I can really, as a person, make my own opinion. So that has been something that is really vital to put the spread of the disease in perspective, and try to be all the time be true, not alarmist, but and add the information with the investigation.
I want to go to you, Kaori, because the point you made in the introduction about these frustrations you felt in Asia with not being able to understand what goes on in your neighboring countries, that really led you to take a big step professionally in your life. And I want to maybe have a few more words on the frustrations, and maybe also dive into the things you thought could be done to solve them.
Yeah, exactly. So in the context of East Asia, just as I mentioned before, because of this uncertainty and the lack of maybe quality information, as Anna said, one of the biggest issue in this region during the pandemic was becoming more and more serious was the infodemic issue. There were so many groundless rumors, misinformation, and disinformations circulating to sort of generate like intra-Asian discrimination. So this was really exactly why we started out this project by first launching our event specifically on disinformation, which ended up gaining a lot of attention and supports after publishing our documentation. And so I think debunking of information, misinformation and disinformation is also really important. But also COVID has really highlighted the need to sort of reconstruct the stratified structure between citizens and the media, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a point that we can all nod to, this new connection between the media and the citizens, and we'll get back into some of the formats that has taken place in. I think we all have points to make there, but I also, of course, want to have you, Ritu, just describe some of the problems. You specifically, you said focus on mobile and have a young audience. Are there any particular difficulties in communicating this kind of topic to this audience?
The big challenge on fact check on COVID in India has been WhatsApp, because every day there's a new cure. Eat tons of chilies and you'll be cured of COVID, or whatever, all kinds of nonsense. So we've actually had to restructure our fact check team, reorient some members of the team entirely towards fact check and COVID. And more importantly, we've always worked with our readers. We always ask our readers to send in anything that they find suspect. And that relationship that we had with our citizen readers has been of enormous value during COVID, because we've been flooded with queries. And because we have a health website where we have an empanelment of specialists and doctors, including epidemiologists and virologists, we were able to get responses on the fact check from the specialists. So the two things that we had as an advantage, one was that we had a health-focused website, and the fact that we had a relationship on fact-checking with the readers brought the citizen and the specialist together in the process of fact-checking. That was one. The other aspect, since you brought it up, we also have a citizen journalism vertical we call My Report. There was a time when our reporters, when there were lockdowns across the countries, and our reporters could not be on the ground. And we, of course, all moved. We shut down office and we all moved to work from home. And at that time, we couldn't get the real stories from the ground. I was talking about the migrant labor traveling back, etc. We were able to work with our citizen journalists, some of whom were with, terrible conditions in quarantine centers, or were bringing to us stories of how what the condition of hospitals or availability of doctors and ventilators was in their area. So we were able to do a lot of ground reporting, even without our reporters being on the ground for a while. Since then, of course, our reporters have been on the ground. We've been reporting from hospitals on conditions. We've been in touch with specialists. We've traveled. We've done a lot of walking with the migrant labor. And we've had an overwhelming response from our audience every time we get this terrible story of somebody who's lost a job or who's suffering terribly because of pandemic, financially or otherwise. We've had an overwhelming response from audiences who have come forth and contributed towards people and towards their livelihood. And that has been sort of reassured us that it's, that everything's not bad with news, everything's not bad with humanity. There is still a human connect somewhere.
That's really interesting, the feedback from our audiences, and I think we should get dive towards that now. I remember now that I told our audience that I'd talk about some of the work I did during my fellowship. I did a project in interviewing 10 Danish health experts, so epidemiologists, health economists, and asking them about how they experienced the first months of the pandemic, dealing with the media, this massive interest in their work that came out of nowhere all of a sudden. And some of the points that they were making in those interviews was also the close relationship that they got to the viewers of the media, and they were often in the studio being asked to answer questions from readers and listeners and viewers. And that's of course not a completely new setup for media to do that, but it's my experience, and you tell us from India, I know in Sweden as well, that's a format that's worked really well for people to get the information out there. That I think might be a good cue to play a little video that you prepared, Anna, about the coverage of SVT, just to get a good grip on how you've handled things, and I'll let you talk about it afterwards.
Nu när vi börjar få den här typen av spridning, då blir det jätteviktigt att vi skyddar våra äldre.
Jag har också känt mig lite deppig när man har sett de här siffrorna nu på senaste tiden. Men 2 nyheter de senaste tiden har varit oerhört positiva.
Det finns vissa nya forskningsrön som antyder att flockimmuniteten kanske inträder tidigare än man tidigare trott. Och det skulle i sådana fall betyda att färre kommer dö. Så att om jag sa 8 till 20 000 förut, så kanske jag skulle säga 6 till 14 000 nu. Så att en aningens mindre mörk bild.
Så här snabbt som vaccinforskningen går nu, det har man liksom aldrig, jag har aldrig varit med om något liknande.
Samtidigt kommer lovande besked om ytterligare ett effektivt vaccin.
Nu har vi ju faktiskt läkemedel som har visat sig ha effekt, vilket är glädjande. Jag tror också att patienterna söker tidigare, vilket kan vara gynnsamt. Men min känsla är absolut att patienterna är lindrigare sjuka och det går bättre för dem nu än vad det gjorde i våras.
I helgen hade jag hand om 2 patienter med konstaterad covid-19 och just nu är jag hemma och är sjuk. Jag är väldigt frustrerad över att jag inte kan vara och avlasta mina kollegor.
Nu är jag på väg och ska ta prover och jag vill ju kunna jobba så fort som möjligt, men jag har fortfarande luftvägssymptom. Och om de här proverna är negativa för covid-19 så kommer jag kunna jobba så fort jag känner att jag orkar det.
Alltså vill någon vara själv i butiken så kan jag bara sätta det på rätt och så kommer det inte in någon mer. Men det funkar så suveränt, jag är så nöjd.
Den sociala distansen, vad är det egentligen som gäller?
Det finns inte jätterätt svar, men WHO har i alla fall satt upp minst 1 meter. Och det man tänker på är droppsmittan, hur långt den når om man skulle hosta eller nysa eller så.
Välkommen till sändningen där du får ställa dina frågor.
Jag har en fråga om vaccinet som är på väg.
Det finns ju redan påbörjat ett arbete med själva hur vaccinationen kommer att gå tillväga.
De har varit gifta i 57 år.
Alltså jag kommer gråta lite nu, det får du slut med.
Den här som har lånat mig, den här stora till mig. Nej, jag älskar ju dig. Jag älskar ju dig.
På svt.se kan ni följa det senaste om förelägget.
May I just say what I tried to illustrate with the clip?
Please.
We had a massive increase with interaction with our audience, and it's really a way of taking ordinary people seriously, and it makes us understand what's really on people's mind. And what made our offerings better is that we've seen a rise of ordinary people and experts. So fewer politicians, fewer opinion leaders, more nurses and professors. And also a change in the tone of voice. So traditionally we tend to be more accusing, and during the pandemic we've been more curious. more wondering. So, and that made our journalism better, because we still ask tough questions, but we're better listeners. And we also have a new TV studio allowing educational use of big screens. And I don't think we ever before would have dared to have a professor in mathematics explaining a complex equation on a big screen. And then also trying to be open to possible solutions as the toy store owner who's created her own traffic light, letting customers know when it's okay to enter the store. So trying to tell about the severe problems, but also about the progress. And we also had a series of columns that was really well read about lights in the end of the tunnel. And again, trying to put the reporting in a perspective. So I think we learned a lot, and we had such a great response from the audience, and never in the history of measuring trust in Sweden has a media company received such high levels of trust. So, and we have still so much to learn, but we are overwhelmed with the levels of trust and the response from the audience.
Super interesting, all these new formats. I wanna tag on to this, the role of the expert, the health professionals, and maybe ask you, Kaur, you have a view over the general coverage in East Asia. Is there a new role of scientists in the media there as you see it?
Well, from the perspective of Japan, I don't think there was any major change of how the media speaks on behalf of the government. Take NHK, Nippon Hosokyoku, the public broadcasting station, for example. There were this increasing criticism over them reporting what the government has just said, just repeating the fact. And people's frustration was really getting bigger. And in this regard, I think there's potential in which Japanese media can improve a lot in, enhancing the trust relationships with its citizens. But so far, we haven't really acknowledged any major change, unfortunately.
Do you think that this change is needed, and how are you working to bring it about?
Well, I'm not a media expert belonging to any authoritative institutions, so I'm not the one bringing the direct change. But from the grassroots level, I think so. We're targeting the Generation Zs who are under 26 years old together, and to have a constructive dialogue together about our issues that we're having together in this generation. So hopefully with this influence getting bigger, and we're also collaborating with many other non-governmental organizations in Asia. So I think as we grow more and more, I hope that our influence and our view on how important it is to have constructive dialogue, not just accusing dialogue of each citizens and the government, the environment will change. And I hope it is very important to have this change. Yeah.
Sure, and a strong way to bring change to the media is to produce something that our viewers, our users like to see. And I hear that all these new concepts across the board are really getting positive feedback from the users. And I thought we'd spend the last 5 minutes here talking about how to sustain this growth and trust in use, and also in satisfaction from the users. And maybe to you, Rito, what are your thoughts about keeping these positive outcomes of the changes that has been brought about by the pandemic?
What we've seen in our experience is we try to understand why is it that Indian news consumers were turning to WhatsApp as against news websites or news sources for their information on the pandemic. Because what our realization was that this is a time of great uncertainty and fear and apprehension, and you try and believe in information that is coming from somebody you trust. And that's what WhatsApp groups were doing. There were stories that were coming sort of validated by a friend or a relative, and you tended to believe in that. And so what was clear to us is that you need to build a relationship with your reader. It cannot be a one-way, we are the information owners, we're giving you the information, you have to passively consume it. So we realized that we needed to open up a dialogue, a conversation with the reader, so that there was a reason to trust us, that it went beyond just data. Because you see, in India, data is very dodgy. The data that is coming to you from the government is, I mean, you don't know whether that's because there's less testing, more testing, or for instance, if there's only the rapid antigen testing that is happening, there's so many false positives, false negatives. So the data in India is not something that that you can use to bolster your facts and stories in that sense. But I think what was reassuring for our audience was to see our reporters on the ground talking to people impacted directly, talking to the people who'd been rendered homeless or jobless. I think that really helped build trust. And because they trusted that information, they were able to trust a lot of the other information that came through. And we've been very transparent in everything that we're doing. When we moved to working from home, we let our readers know that. When we had reporters working with epidemiologists and virologists, we told them how we are working with them, that it's not just Zoom interviews that we're doing with them, we're taking data to them, we're working closely with them. So I think a certain amount of transparency and a certain amount of empathy in the telling of the stories, I think that helps build the trust at these times.
Yeah.
And we've seen that impact our traffic and our readership.
Sure, and that's not, I think, something that you're measuring at the WHO, Gabby, but the role of your experts and your view on the media as a whole has you talked about how you've evolved as you were going. How do you view this relationship to the users of the media? Is there something that you have changed in your strategy of communications? Yes. Yeah, just briefly, please, because we're running out of time here.
Sure. We work with the media to reach their audiences, yes, but we do a lot of direct outreach to audiences, including Gen Z audiences. We try to go where people are. So, for instance, we have throughout the year, we have worked with the video game industry, gaming companies, to get health messages to gamers. So when they're playing games, whether they're mobile games, handheld, and so on, they get the messages. Same with Tinder. We've put health messages on Tinder, dating app, and many, many other apps and channels, platforms that reach young people, old people, all people, because to expect people to come to our website is absurd. I mean, you all know that in the news business. You have to push things out. You have to go where the people are. And also, so many of these channels are interactive. So the people we're reaching can ask us questions. Why did you say this? Why are you saying that? Why did you say this then? And why has it changed? And so we're able to have ongoing dialogues. And we have our experts interacting directly with people through live social media engagements and so on. I just want to say a word about fact checking. From a few minutes ago, somebody was talking about fact checking. I think it might have been Ritu. But it might have been Anne. Anyway, Kaori, fact checkers in media outlets are heroic, and the rise of fact checkers has just been a wonder to behold. And I just also want to, it's not just about checking facts. Is it true that hydroxychloroquine does or doesn't? It doesn't make a difference in against COVID. One of the things that fact checkers have pushed non-fact checking journalists, normal journalists, to do is fact check politicians. And you see certainly in America and increasingly in Britain and other places, the willingness of news outlets to not just be stenographers for politicians and repeat whatever they say. The willingness of headline writers and writers of stories to say, this president, this prime minister, this cabinet member said this without providing evidence, said it falsely. That has been a huge service to media audiences, and I really appreciate that. Over.
We're running out of time here. I want to give maybe the word to you, Anna, towards the end here. Give you just 30 seconds to briefly talk about how you're going to try and retain this new trust and happiness of your users.
I think we want to retain a more educational approach, a more data journalism, more experts and fewer opinion makers, more interaction with the audience. And we learned that barefoot TV, like video diaries, work both online and on TV. And we've seen an interesting crossover between sport and news, which has been vital for the creativity, because the sport department kind of went out of business, and they helped and inspired the news organization in just new, really inspirational ways.
Thank you. We have all these new formats. We have new roles of the experts. We have journalism closer to the users, and we have different formats and experiences, hopefully gaining the trust of our users. This is all that we had time to discuss today. I want to thank you all very much for joining us here, and also thank you to the viewers. We're now in the conference moving on to a deep dive into some of the data on European public broadcasters handling of the pandemic. Thank you so much for joining.